excellent talk. I request Dr. Ramakrishnan to give memento to Dr. Pratima Murthy. This being a virtual session, already we have sent the memento. Madam, if you can have it, you can just show it to us.
I'm sure it's come to my office. I'm at home. It doesn't matter. Mementos are not important. I think having your attention and interacting with all of you is the best gift. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir, Prasadra sir, I think, due to this virtual session, we'll be sending the memento by post. Thank you, sir. Thank you for chairing the session.
Yeah. We already got the memento and felicitation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much
for your involvement. Now I request Dr. Vishala Akula to give the memento to Dr. Ramakrishnan. Now we'll proceed further. Coming to the second session, the speaker is Dr. Atul Ambekar sir. The chairpersons are Dr. Ramanan Erat and Dr. Vishal Indla. I would like to introduce the first chairperson, Dr. Ramanan Erat. He is a consultant psychiatrist in Palakkad. He has completed his DPM in 1983 in LMG Medical College, Bombay, and MD from KEM Hospital and Seth GS Medical College, Bombay in 1991. He served as past president of IPS Kerala. He also served as past vice president of IMA Kerala, North Zone. He was the past chief election officer for the national IPS. He used to give a talk on depression in IMA local branches, Physicians Club, Gynae Club, ENT Club, and General Practitioners Forum. Sir, we welcome you, sir, to the session. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Vishal Indla, the another chairperson. He has a lot of credits to his personality. He received a gold medal. He's a gold medalist for being the topper of the MD psychiatry exam held in August 2005 at NIMHANS. Silver Jubilee. He's a recipient of Silver Jubilee Award from NIMHANS for being the best outgoing student in psychiatry in the year 2005. He received the prestigious World Psychiatric Association Young Psychiatry Fellowship Award for the year 2007 at Melbourne, Australia. He also received the 12th Teachers Young Achievers Club Recognition Award in the year 2013. He also gave a TED Talk in 2017 on the topic, At Work, Less is More. Currently, he is the Director and Chief Consultant Psychiatrist at NIMHANS Hospital, Vijayawada, which is a 50-bedded psychiatry hospital. So we welcome you, sir, to the session. I hand over the mic to the chairpersons. Over to you, sir.
Thanks the organizing committee for asking us to chair this particular session from the first bat to the second bat. I think Dr. Atul will be speaking on the landscape, changing landscape of perception and policies of cannabis. And I would like to introduce Dr. Atul Ambekar. He is a professor of NDDTC at AIIMS, New Delhi, and he is the Secretary General of Addiction Psychiatry Society. He has more than 100 publications, and he is a resource person and expert for UNODC, and is a principal investigator for National Drug Use Survey, and he's got many awards like the South Asia Award 2016 and Venus International Medical Award in 2019 for excellence in psychiatry. I'll just introduce the topic. Regarding cannabis, cannabis has been in use in ancient India way back. You can see in various scriptures like Atharva Veda and Rig Veda. And it is used widely in Ayurvedic preparations. Even in Sushruta Samhita, it has been said to be contained in some of the preparations, like for using it in phlegm and diarrhea. And there had been various regulations in various states of India regarding, and especially Assam. There is an Assam Ganja Bhang Prohibition Act, which prohibits any way of using or possession or consumption of cannabis and bhang. Whereas in Maharashtra, there is some sort of a license for bhang, but not for other cannabis. In Gujarat, there is a different law, and there had been various arguments in Parliament by different members in legalizing and decriminalizing the use of cannabis. And I think India voted in favor of removing cannabis and cannabis resins from Schedule 4 of the 1961 Single Convention of on Narcotic Drugs at the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs in 2020. They made it as a change from Schedule 4 to a loosely regulated Schedule 1 thing. And there has been a move in Himachal Pradesh and Tripura to legalize and decriminalize and in the protection of cannabis to a certain extent. I think rest of the introduction of the topic will be done by Ashok. By Vishal.
Thank you, sir.
Over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Atul, for joining us all the way from AIMS. And Dr. Atul has done a lot of on-the-ground work in addiction space, and it's so nice to have you here with us today. And sir, what a day it is. We are discussing very interesting things like decriminalizing cannabis. We've never even thought we will even talk about these kind of things. But as the topic rightly says, it's all about perception, and perception always changes the policies. And looks like a lot of big voices are behind the pro-cannabis movement now. Recently, there was a very big editorial, very influential editorial by Dr. Vikram Patel, who is considered an authority in public health space. And he actually came very strongly in favor of why we should be legalizing cannabis. And he's given a very nice research-based picture supporting that. And very nice critical points have been made by Ramanan sir about how India has always been culturally accepting cannabis for its festivals, for the important events. It's always been culturally accepted. In fact, there was a lot of UN and US pressure on us, and that's why we had to withdraw it in 1985. Until 85, it was just legally sold all over like any other continent. So we are in interesting times, and no better than Dr. Atul Ambekar to throw light on this and tell us about the nuances, and also maybe sir can throw light on what would we tell the youngsters until this is legalized. Many times they throw questions at us as to see everywhere in the West, Canada and all, it's legalized. In India, this is not. So you don't know the science. The science actually isn't favorable. These are interesting things. And Dr. Atul, over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
I am audible?
Yes.
Am I audible, everyone?
Yes, yes, you are audible, but looks like there is a little bit of lag.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, organizers, for having me here. I'm really surprised. Both the chairpersons have actually, within the span of few seconds, have delivered half of my talk, what I was talking about. But I hope to be able to convey some of my understanding and my thoughts on this topic with all of you today. I'll begin my talk by, first of all, giving a loud shout out and applause to all our Corona warriors who are really fighting day in and out and making sure that many of us stay alive. In Delhi, situation is bad, and I pray for health and safety for every one of us here. And now I'll proceed to the slides. I will be talking about the changing landscape of perception and policies, and how perhaps the world is coming full circle and how we as a society should deal with it. On the screen, you can see actually stores. One is the traditional bhang store in India, government approved bhang shop, which has been there present in India for a very, very long time. So in the world, in the Western world, the legalization of cannabis as a category has started only
Atul, screen sharing is not there. Stop.
I'm sorry. I think I thought I was disconnected for a while. Am I audible again?
Yes,
Yeah.
you're audible, but
But
slow and there
screen
is a
sharing.
lag.
Can you hear me again? Am I
Yes.
audible?
Yes,
Thank
Yes,
you.
better
Thank you.
now.
Thank you. Sorry, I was disconnected.
Share the slides.
Can you share your screen again, Dr. Atul? We can't see the screen yet, your presentation.
Is the screen visible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I was talking about how we have had farm shops for a very long time now, but the Western world is actually waking up to legalize of cannabis only recently. So there are a thing or two the Western world can learn from the Indian society, and some of these issues I'll be talking about as we go along. So basically, as we know, cannabis is the oldest psychoactive substances which has been sourced from plants. As we know, it has sources for psychoactive substances for us humans, both for food as well as for the purpose of intoxication. So be it alcohol, be it opiates, these are plant-based products. This particular plant
There's some problem with this connection.
Yeah.
Atul, unmute. Atul, please unmute. Unmute. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't know. Yesterday, when we tested the system, it all worked just fine. But I guess technology has its way of deceiving us at times. So, as I was saying, cannabis is a plant-based product, but there are synthetic varieties also available. And as we all of us know, delta 9 THC is the main psychoactive ingredient responsible for all those euphorics. Delta 9 THC, which does get cannabinoids as well, which are not as potent or as efficacious in the largely euphoriant or intoxicating properties for which human beings like using cannabis. The highest concentration of this THC comes from the flowering tops, then which is followed by the leaves and seeds and so on. The bhang, which comes from the
I think there is some problem with this.
Attention to technical team, Sun Pharma. There's a disturbance in video and as well as audio. There's a lot of fluctuations coming in audience link. You check the audience link, there's a lot of disturbance in the audio. And now video problem also there. Please check it immediately. Technical team.
Atul is missing.
Looks like his connection there is unstable. So if it may be more than anything, it's his connection that side. So
very unstable connection he has.
I think there is a problem from the speaker laptop. I think Sunfarma people are contacting them. And shortly, I think he is again starting. There is a problem from the speaker side.
Internet connection. I have just changed my internet connection. Hopefully, this will work better. Let's see. Let's pray. Am I audible again?
Yeah,
very much. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So as I was saying, because of this differential properties of different parts of plant in terms of the concentration of THC under the international conventions as well as under the Indian law, bhang is not a controlled product. And hence, bhang is not a part of also initially. That's what our chairperson was also initially referring to, that different state governments have the power to enact different kind of excise laws and policies regarding bhang market. So that's why in some states of India, we have legal regulated bhang market and bhang shops. Other states do not. But nowhere in India, bhang is explicitly illegal under the NDPS Act. While charas and ganja, they happen to be illegal under the NDPS Act since 1985. Before that, even those were not illegal in India. So as far as cannabis epidemiology is concerned, it's often very touted fact that cannabis is the most commonly used illicit drug worldwide. But here is the catch. Out of 183 million cannabis users globally, only about 13 million are, which means as a proportion of users, a very minuscule proportion actually suffers from any harmful effects or addiction or cannabis use disorder develops. Then it runs its course like any other substance use disorder. So there will be relapse, there will be remissions, there may have some other kinds of addiction related harms and so on. But proportion of those users who suffer from cannabis use disorders is actually smallest across all substances. So this is data actually from US, but this holds true for many other countries as well, where we can see as compared to nicotine, heroin or cocaine, a very small proportion of people actually in single digit of cannabis users, they suffer from cannabis dependence. So that's how we must appreciate this epidemiology of cannabis use as well. Another way of looking at it is how much is cannabis use disorders contributing to the global burden of diseases. As we can see in this graph, out of total use disorders, almost half is caused by alcohol, other half is caused by all drugs put together. Among all these drugs, just about 5% is the contribution of cannabis. So despite cannabis being the most common illegal drug used, its contribution to the minimal. And these are some of the more scientific facts which are emerging, which are changing the perceptions, and perhaps which are also changing the policies. This particular infographic, the fonts is very small. No one can see actually read anything. One has to zoom actually. But what it shows is that cannabis has a very long history of use throughout the world. And India, as our chairperson also put it,
has had a very long history of using cannabis for both medicinal as well as recreational purpose. In fact, people have also touted some of the spiritual uses of cannabis, and that's how it has got some spiritual or religious sanction in our society as well for a long time. Today, the situation is very different across the world. As we can see in this map, the blue colored areas are where cannabis use is legal for recreational purpose, just like alcohol is legal in our country largely. So in other areas, it's illegal, but still decriminalized. Gradually, these blue and yellow areas are increasing throughout the world, and the pink and red areas are shrinking. Our country, as we know, it's illegal, but often not very well enforced. That's the status at the global level our country has got. Historically, as Dr. Vishal was also telling, we Indians have had a very tall substances, be it alcohol, opium, or cannabis. There has been some degree of social sanction for use of alcohol, cannabis, and opium. But on the other hand, we have always had in our society a vice versus virtue binary, meaning people who denounce, people who sort of do sacrifice of any kind of pleasure deserve to be respected in the society. That pleasure may be pleasure of a marital life. That pleasure may be pleasure of just eating good food. So that's why fasting is seen as much more respecting. That pleasure may be wearing good clothes. So that's why ascetics, sadhus who lead a simple life, they deserve much more respect. And that's why shunning any kind of pleasurable activity is seen as respectful. So that's why it's virtuous to be away from psychoactive substances, while substances are vices. But to a large extent, society tolerates and accepts if some people occasionally indulge in use of some form of pleasurable behaviors, including use of psychoactive substances. So that has been the kind of attitude throughout, which started changing, particularly for cannabis, since the colonial times. What happened was, when we were under the colonial rule, British government sought to actively discourage cannabis consumption. There were two reasons for this. One reason was the distrust toward native kind of people. What do they know? They must be using something bad. Their behavior, their culture must be backward and must be degenerated. So that's why they wanted to control and regulate cannabis consumption in India. Another reason was they were also worried that if harm, then who will consume their expensively made gin or whiskey, which they were importing from their country? So it was important to show Indians that cannabis is really harmful for them. So that's why they created this very large-scale hemp drug commission. This drug commission, a large-scale epidemiological kind of study, which collected information from a variety of sources with a large number of informants, including visits to asylum. So no one from psychiatry can also say that they overlooked cannabis-induced psychosis, which is a favorite weapon for psychiatrists against cannabis. And all they concluded was that in India, moderate use of cannabis is the rule. Excessive use is comparatively exceptional. There are physical effects, but largely moderate effects does not result, which can cause all this. And hence, their key recommendation was cannabis regulation and taxation rather than complete prohibition or ban. But still, British government did not really pay much heed to it, the scientific advice, because of many political and practical reasons. Gradually, the control on cannabis started increasing, even in the British times. But one thing is sure, the British government and the colonial rule, it succeeded in changing the perception about cannabis in the Indian society. We Indians also started gradually believing that the intoxication of choice, if you are an upwardly mobile individual, is alcohol, right? So that's why if you are consuming bhang or ganja, you are backward, you are rural, right? You are not sophisticated. It's only when you consume whiskey or beer or wine, that's how you start getting counted in the high society. And nowhere it got on. There is one Amitabh Bachchan who is Don, who is Western, suave, sophisticated. He consumes wine, and he consumes bhang, native, rustic, unpolished. So more than the good or bad dichotomy, it's the modern versus the backward dichotomy, which can be seen here. And that has been internalized us by Indians, and this has been a colonial project in which they have by and large succeeded. So we banned at the international level. What happened there? Now what happens is how prohibition came to fore as a policy to control substances. Most religions actually discourage psychoactive substance use, and their level of tolerance varies. In India, traditionally, we have been tolerant, though discouraging psychoactive substance use, as I was saying earlier. But this idea of banning any recreational, occasional use of some psychoactive substances is actually inspired by Anglo-American Christian Puritanism, and also partly inspired by the Islamic principles of haram, where something is totally banned for you. In the developed Western world, US and North America particularly, this was also fueled by racist sentiments, because Chinese and Mexican immigrants, they were using their traditional products, opium and cannabis. And there was a habitual distrust of the other, the person from outside. So the person which the outsider is using must be something bad, must be controlled, must be banned. Nowhere these kind of noises were made for the white people consuming wine or alcohol, except for a brief period in US history when alcohol was prohibited, and it had to be lifted because of the devastating consequences of that. And then came the United Nations Drug Conventions, which governed the international drug control framework. They established internationally applicable control measure. The purpose was to ensure that psychoactive substances are available for medical and scientific purpose, and yet they are not illegally used, misused, or abused. So that's why these three conventions were formed, 61, 71, 88. I'm not going into details of this. The stated purpose was health and welfare of mankind. So cannabis actually, along with cocaine and opium, got banned in the single convention of 1961, which was largely about banning the plant-based substances. Though scientific data, even at that point in time, did not really support putting cannabis in the same category as heroin or cocaine. But still, cannabis also got banned along with those. In this 61 convention itself, there are 4 schedules for controlling different drugs. As Dr. Ramanan was also telling us, the chair was also telling us in the beginning, earlier cannabis was scheduled in both Schedule 1 and Schedule 4, meaning it had the status of harmful and useless. Now recently, the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs has done a voting. India voted in favor. So now cannabis has the status as such of harmful, but potentially useful. So now it's controlled in Schedule 1, which means potentially useful, but harmful. Earlier it was Schedule 4, which is useless and harmful. So that's the slight progress which the human community has made based upon some recommendations of WHO. But even at that point in time in 1961, India did try to assert that cannabis does have some medicinal properties. It has been part of our indigenous systems of medicine like Ayurveda. And because of some negotiations, India succeeded in keeping bhang out of the definition of cannabis. So globally, cannabis leaves are currently not controlled thanks to India and its advocacy. India also got a grace period of 25 years for fully banning ganja and charas. That is something India could not succeed in telling them that ganja and charas are really not that harmful for Indian society. Let us continue controlling them the way we have been controlling. But hence, 61 plus 25, 85. That's why in a haste, we had to bring about the 1985 NDPS Act. We had to ban charas and ganja. And the side effects of that ban is something we can see now. I will come to that very, very soon. So the legal framework in India is ganja and charas are completely criminalized in the NDPS Act, just like heroin and cocaine. Bhang is out of the purview. Bhang, as I was telling, status is different in different states. Gujarat, the proverbial prohibition state for alcohol, has actually lifted the Bhang prohibition in 2017. So Bhang is now a legal product in Gujarat since 2017. The key question we must examine as people of science is this: are all drugs equally harmful? We know that drugs differ in their propensity to cause all kinds of harms, be it health harms, be it mental harms such as addiction or use disorders, or other kinds of social and economic harms. This project is something which initially Professor David Nutt from UK, he worked upon. He actually developed a multi-criteria decision on various psychoactive substances on various parameters of harm, physical, dependence, and social parameters and social harms. Looked at all substances from alcohol to mushrooms to buprenorphine, everything. And what they concluded was really eye-opener for many people around the world, including for the UK government. They actually found that the legal substances like alcohol and tobacco were among the top harmful substances. The so-called illegal substance in the form of cannabis harms. And this particular kind of analysis, a kind of perspective of looking at harms of different substances, has been repeated by different research groups also. EMCA-DDA from Europe has compiled a good review of this. So on various parameters, people have tried to compare substances for their harms, safety, intoxication, dependence, etc. And in all of this, cannabis is one of the least damaging substances, despite being illegal. Alcohol and tobacco, despite being legal, have always topped the list of harmful substances. And that has now led to many people around the world starting asking this question: does it make sense to really, and more importantly, to criminalize the use? Not just sale, marketing, production, but even personal consumption is also treated as a crime. So does it make sense? That's what question people had been asking throughout the world. And that perhaps has led to a change in the policy stance of various countries. What people have also called gradual weeding of the world, where gradually the perception about these Dutch coffee shops, which use purpose, started from exempting medical use cannabis in some US states, social clubs of cannabis in some European countries, and now Canada and some other countries that path. Some other European countries are also reaching there very soon. But the question is this: we must also counter this particular propaganda. That cannabis is completely harmless. As a chairperson was youngsters are telling us now that cannabis is harmless and कुछ नहीं होता इसको लेने से. We must keep this in mind, that cannabis is not harmless.
Dr. Atul, again some disturbance in your voice. We can't see the screen also now. There is also some disturbance again in the audio.
Lost the screen. We lost the connection.
I request the audience to just hold on for a moment as the organizers are working out to get in touch with Dr. Atul and get the presentation going again. It's actually been very deep insights from Dr. Atul. It's just unfortunate that we are having some difficulties with the audio and the video. Dr. Atul, are you ready now?
Yes, I am ready. Am I audible now?
Yes.
I'm extremely sorry for I don't know what's happening today. It doesn't happen otherwise. It's just my misfortune, and my sincere apologies to everyone. So as I was talking, this gateway theory must be now totally debunked. Cannabis is as much a gateway to other drugs as tea and coffee are the gateway to alcohol. What we see in the society, that people use cannabis and then move on to other drugs. That's because they are illegal and hence dealt with by the same market. So that's why all of them go underground, and that's why once you access cannabis, it becomes easier to access heroin or cocaine also. If cannabis were legal, then surely this gateway issue would not have been encountered. No one says why tea and coffee are gateway for alcohol. Right. So this particular issue of legalizing of cannabis by many countries has also received scientific scrutiny. And there are both kinds of that legalization leads to more problematic use. There are perhaps some harmful consequences of legalization of cannabis wherever it has been occurring. But very authentic, very authoritative work what was done by Layton in 2019 on Canada. So what they found is that now there is increasingly better evidence that legalization large or sustained increase in traffic accidents. There is better evidence. What we also caution is it will take some more time before we understand fully the effects of legalization. Of course, any policy intervention will have both some good effects, some not so good effects. What any wise government need to do is to weigh both the pros and cons of any policy options, and that's how to decide the best course of action. But one thing is certain, as our chairperson was also telling us, perception and policies, both of them have a reciprocal relationship with each other. This very authoritative review in cannabis use, attitudes, and its legal status. And here we can see the time series graphs of both. As the perception of perceived risk of marijuana use goes down, the figures for use, they go on in increase. So in other words, both of them go hand in hand. More people believing that a substance is less harmful would mean more people using that substance. But does more people using a substance mean more harmful effects to the society? That's a different issue altogether. We have already established that a very small proportion of users will suffer from use disorders, and a very small contribution to global burden of disease will be made by cannabis use disorders. So that much we have established. So any figure of increase in cannabis use for recreational purpose must be seen with that perspective. Coming to what are the various policy options for any psychoactive substances, these four very well-known policy options are there, and a combination of these actually works for in many countries for any psychoactive substance. For instance, prohibition is the favorite. Just like some people suffer from psychoactive substance, makers suffer from prohibition use disorder, thing that they don't like. So this prohibition usually is accompanied by criminalizing of all activities related to drug production, trafficking. The iron law of prohibition is very well known. Whenever you prohibit a substance, it's more potent and consumed. That's why in prohibition states of India like Gujarat and Bihar, it's difficult to get your hands on beer. It's much easier to get your hands on whiskey, right? Because by volume, you can pack much more alcohol in whiskey as compared to beer. Then there are many other unintended consequences of prohibition as well. It creates a black market sources of policies towards something which is perhaps not so important. It causes geographical displacement and substance displacement. You ban one substance, people start consuming some other substitute, some other substance, which perhaps may be more harmful. And from our perspective, the increasing stigma and marginalization of people using drugs, that's one of the biggest damage which a prohibitionist approach can cause. And India has been facing all these problems related to cannabis prohibitions since 1985 onwards. There is a very classic example in India where perhaps cannabis gun prohibition society. What has happened to the use of other drugs is a very important kind of question. If we look at our recent data on magnitude of drug use in India, our cannabis use figures are like this. About 3 crore people using cannabis, out of which 25 lakh are dependent users. But importantly, while more people use bhang, which is a less potent and legal variety of cannabis, much more people suffer from charas or ganja use disorders. So we can see here clearly that more use does not equate to more addiction. Addiction is more for charas and ganja. Also, there are statewide variations in India. In some states, particularly in the east of the country, there is more charas and ganja use as compared to bhang use, particularly in the northeastern states, where there is no traditional culturally accepted use of bhang. So, which some people may argue that perhaps a culturally accepted use of bhang may also protect against use of more potent varieties of cannabis. But that something must be tested through more rigorous epidemiological research. But more worrying thing is this: when we compare Indian figures with the global data, as we can see here, our figures for cannabis consumption are much lower as compared to the global average. But our figures for opioid consumption are 3 times that of global average. So in other words, what has happened is our excessive control on cannabis, charas or ganja, has perhaps been associated with increase in use of much more potent opioid drugs. Professor Murthy was also talking about how opioid epidemic is increasing in India. And this has perhaps been exemplified by the attitude of our drug law enforcement also. You can see here in the month by the NCB, Narcotics Control Bureau, how they are celebrating half a kilogram of charas, 100 tablets of diazepam. So all these efforts are actually lost opportunities where they could have caught a large consignment of heroin or cocaine, which are much more harmful drugs. So that's how the differential policy response is something our law enforcement officers, law enforcement sector must also learn. Something very interesting. I'm just reaching towards the end now. Is the attitude towards cannabis changing in India? I'm just taking some examples from our popular culture, and which is the primary face of our popular culture, primary reflection, movies, largely the Hindi movies, which are seen by a large number of people in the world. If you remember the portrayal of Bhang in some of the old Hindi movies of 70s or 80s, there used to be some scenes, some situations where the protagonist people, they consume Bhang, and then there is usually a song and dance about it. There is Jai Jai Shiv Shankar from Aapki Kasam, Khai Ke Pan Banaras Wala from Dawn. So what used to happen actually in these sequences is characters were using Bhang, which was not illegal anyway, but it used to be a big deal event. Something drastic, something very different, something very exotic is happening. There used to be a song and dance about it. So something extraordinary taking place. That's how Bhang use was portrayed at that point in time. Compared to the more realistic portrayal, which we see now in last few years, our movies have become much more realistic. I'm just highlighting two scenes here from two of the popular movies. Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara, in which Farhan Akhtar is meeting his long-lost father Nasiruddin Shah, who is casually rolling a ganja joint. In another movie, Kapoor and Sons, two brothers are sharing a charas ganja cigarette, and in one of the scenes, their grandfather is also sharing this charas ganja cigarette with them. More importantly, these characters which are seen rolling joints are seen indulging in a very casual act. So there is no big deal made out of use of their charas ganja. Almost it's a background, ordinary everyday activity, just like someone sipping a cup of tea or coffee or eating food. So in other words, perhaps this also reflects in the urban upper middle class crowd which goes to watch these movies actually, a change in perception of cannabis, something which our chairperson was also talking about. About other policy options, depenalization or decriminalization, they are also in force increasingly in many countries now. There are various forms of depenalization or decriminalization where essentially drug trade is criminalized or banned, but personal drug consumption is not regarded as a crime. Portugal is the prime example of it, which has decriminalized all drugs for many years now. Now, many other countries are increasingly decriminalizing drugs. And in Portugal, actually, some very good effects of drug decriminalization are being seen. Whenever a person is caught with small amount of drugs, they are sent to social workers and medical experts. And because of this policy, Portugal has actually seen a reduction in drug use among young people. So overall, this is an answer to those who think that criminalizing drug use is important to keep young people away from the reverse happened actually in countries which have decriminalized regulation as a policy option, as Canada has done, as India has already been doing for Bhang. It may take a variety of forms, just like tea or coffee, open sale for everyone. Alcohol, a large amount of regulation. Tobacco, some amount of regulation. So there is a spectrum of policy option for legalization and regulation as well. So some of these models which are being currently researched across the world can be considered anywhere. What we must consider, particularly we as psychiatrists, if we are asked this question, if cannabis is decriminalized or legalized in India, we need to find answers to these questions. Will the use increase? Definitely. Will the addiction increase? To some measure. More important questions are these. Will road traffic accidents, psychosis, will that increase? What will be the net effect on crime, particularly the organized crime and mafia activity? What will be the effect on use of other drugs? What will be the economic consequences? A thorough examination of all these questions are important before we decide about whether the status quo is fine for us, where our police is catching 50 grams of ganja from Bollywood celebrities and kilograms and tons of heroin is being smuggled across the border. overall it will be a net benefit or net loss to the society is something we need to dispassionately, scientifically examine and then come to a conclusion. Whether the status quo is acceptable to us or not, that's what we need to take a stock of. Overall, just to conclude now, the drug policy spectrum is very wide. It ranges from complete prohibition at one end to complete unhinged access like tea and coffee at the other end, unregulated legal market. Both of these can be harmful for any psychoactive substance like cannabis. What is being recommended on the basis of scientific research is the middle ground, strict legal regulation. So any kind of complete prohibition is all kind of complete unbridled market access is also harmful to the society. We can't, legalization doesn't mean leaving everything in the hands of corporates. Similarly, criminalization or ban also doesn't mean leaving everything in the hands of crime, criminals and mafia. Middle ground legal regulation is something which the world is talking about, and we must also pay heed to it and pay some attention to it. I believe it's the time to correct the historical wrongs. The world is gradually moving towards the direction of more rational and more evidence a drug-free India. India also has evolved in last 70 years. We arguably have much more clout now in the world as compared to 70 years back in the days of 61 convention. Our regulatory systems, our pharmaceutical industry is much more mature now. Our capacity to generate evidence, do research and learn from it has increased arguably. We are trying to be Vishwaguru in many other and Atmanirbhar in many other forms. So this is something also we cannot leave to whatever other countries are doing. We must develop our own understanding, our own thinking. We should be able to formulate drug policies based on principles of health, welfare, and human rights. But it would be a travesty to justice if we are growing too much of a large amount of cannabis plant, and yet we are importing cannabis-based medicines in a few years from now from other countries. So let's also pay attention to all these aspects. I'll end with this quote by Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General. Drugs have destroyed many lives, but wrong government policies have destroyed many more. Addiction Psychiatry Society of India calling all young professionals to visit the society website and join us. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your patient listening, and my sincere apologies for the interruption.
Thank you, Dr. Atul. A very scholarly presentation from you. And of course, there were some interruptions, but I think your point is well conveyed, especially about the strong winds of change that are blowing in favor of cannabis. Looks like cannabis is in for good times in the country. There are a lot of questions. So, Sir, Ramanan, sir, can I start taking the questions?
Yeah. I'll take one question from Ramkumar from Kerala. He is asking about, can psychotic symptoms come under the intoxication of cannabis as it is often self-limiting? That is one question from Ramkumar of Kerala.
Yeah. Cannabis and its association with psychosis is well known. What has also been concluded during the time of Indian Commission as well as legalized in those jurisdictions, psychiatrists have not seen a community increase in incidence or prevalence of psychosis as such, right? So there will be more people using cannabis, may mean more cannabis associated psychosis load, but it does not mean that there is going to be certainly a more prevalence of schizophrenia or other kinds of psychosis in the society or in our clinics.
In this connection, I would say, regarding the cannabis-induced psychosis, there was a difference of opinion whether the cannabis itself produces a psychosis or whether it exacerbates the existing or the pre-existing psychotic phenomena. There was the earlier journals used to say about cannabis-induced psychosis is misnomer. But still, it's a debatable question. You can take over, Vishal.
Yeah. So there are a few questions from Dr. Sanjay from Karimnagar. So let's, one of the questions I think is already answered about, is it the US industrial lobby that has somehow snubbed the use of cannabis in the country? I think Dr. Atul answered that question quite well. There are a couple of other questions from him. One of the questions is about, is there any use of cannabis in the treatment of psychiatric conditions? We know it is used for treatment of certain medical conditions, but is there any indication for use in psychiatric conditions? The other question is, generally for drug addiction, is it better if we change from this legal versus illegal to a disease model so that there is better acceptance and better regulation? These are the two questions from Dr. Sanjay. Dr. Atul?
And thank you very much for asking this question. About use of cannabis for the treatment of psychiatric conditions, based preparations can be used for the treatment of variety of health conditions, including pain, including some other mental health conditions. Things. One is, at this moment, nothing associated with cannabis or THC is approved as a medication for treatment of any psychiatric condition at this moment. So this is under research, that kind of status. What we also must remember is the kind of strict regulations and policies applicable to overall cannabis have been applied to the cannabis product related research as well. And hence, the more open research, the more open-minded research, the more funded research which should have happened in this area, that has not taken place. And that, I think, is the need of our. So at this moment, I'm not saying that cannabis will definitely have a role there. But as a research candidate, the global scientific community must conduct research whether cannabis products can be useful for treatment of many health conditions, including mental health conditions or not. And another question was about the
disease model instead of a legal versus illegal paradigm.
Well, as such, never in our psychiatric classifications we had criteria of whether your person is using a drug which is legal or illegal as a diagnostic criteria for substance use disorders or dependence, right? So that has never been our criteria. We always understand substance use in the form of as a behavioral constellation of symptoms. So be it tobacco or alcohol or cannabis, for us, that doesn't matter when we make a diagnosis of substance use disorders. What does happen is the legal or illegal status does make it difficult for an individual to seek help and enhances the stigma. So that's why some people have quipped, the most harmful thing you can do with marijuana is to get caught with it, right? So, I mean, the point is, it's only the legal consequences which may be harmful to you, not other consequences. That's the extreme kind of sarcastic view. But yes, we must look at the disease model, but we must not forget that legal or illegal classification does create some problem for our patients. So we must fight for what is right for our patients.
There's one question from Dr. Anand Kale, again a very interesting question on cannabis use and creativity. Does it promote creativity the way it is shown among sadhus and so on and so forth?
Again, the jury on it is divided. Are creative people more drawn to cannabis? I don't know. I mean, there may be something there. Some people may be wired differently, who may have more creative instincts with them, who may also get drawn to various different experiences which life has to offer, including use of psychoactive substances such as cannabis. But yes, people who use cannabis, they do describe in very flowery, very articulate terms how it helps them connect within themselves, to connect to the outer world, connect to the spatial or the supernatural, spiritual kind of powers, and so on. I urge everyone interested in this particular area to read the Professor Carl Hart's book on drug use for grown-ups. A very recent book. He is a professor of psychology, known drug addiction researcher, and himself a user of various psychoactive substances, including cannabis, heroin, and cocaine. So yes, there may be some truth there when some people say that cannabis helps them increase their creativity, but that I won't say if you want to increase your creativity, start using cannabis. That's not something I can recommend.
Dr. Sabita from Chennai, I think last two questions I will say, ask the question, then Dr. Ramanan can take over. Dr. Sabita from Chennai wants to know, does legalizing cannabis increase the usage in vulnerable group, that's the adolescents, and what are the risks with that?
Right. One thing is certain, that legalizations means more people will admit to using cannabis in surveys, right? So in other words, and that will be seen as increased use. There may be actual increase in use. There may be actual better reporting by people in the surveys, because now they are not scared that I am admitting to an illegal substance. So that part is there. Whenever a substance is legalized and regulated, some amount of increase in adolescent is always questioned, and that risk is always there. However, what we must remember is, for a legal substance, it's much more feasible to control its access to special age groups as compared to an illegal substance. For instance, take alcohol. In India, if you look at the figures for adults consuming alcohol and children and adolescents consuming alcohol, you will find a very wide gap. In comparison, for illegal drugs, if you look at figures for adults accessing that substance and adolescents accessing that substance, you will find a much narrower gap. So people have also argued that if the product is legally regulated, then enforcing its access to adolescents will be much more feasible. Like in Western countries, if you go to a bar or a wine shops and want to buy alcohol, you may have to produce an age certificate and identity. But a person sending a stuff to you in back alley will never ask you for your age proof, whether you are 17 or you are 19. So that kind of difference people are making for improving and maintaining sort of access to vulnerable groups. So that factor also must be borne in mind.
Thank you, Dr. Atul. Finally, when do you think cannabis is going to be legal in India? You are close to the policy matters there in working in AIIMS. Do you have any inside information on that?
Absolutely no. Absolutely no. No one must hazard this kind of prediction with the kind of world which we are living in. Let's just hope that the voice, whenever this discussion comes up in the corridors of power, there is a voice of science there. There is someone sitting there who understands mental health, who understands addiction, and who can look at scientific data objectively, dispassionately, not with the rhetoric of the Vishwaguru or superpower, not with the rhetoric of Ayurveda or the long tradition of the great Indian culture, and not with the lens of we want a pure, sattvic, drug-free India, right? All these extremes are not useful for us. We need a dispassionate, objective, scientific analysis of facts to have a policy recommendation.
Sir, over to you, Ramanan, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Atul, for your nice presentation. We have covered most of the things, right from the cannabis, its origin, to the legal aspects and its pros and cons of the legalization and decriminalization. What I felt was that legalization, decriminalization, though to a certain extent will reduce the substance use, but as Dr. Vishal was saying, it will be an opportunity in the open market when we legalize it or decriminalize it. The corporates will take over, and there will be a sort of a equivalent drug war like thing. I think that's also will be an unfortunate thing, but the pros and cons are there for the legalization and decriminalization. But all said and done, it will take time the debate will go on. Probably the issue, the policymakers will come to a wise decision later. at some point of time. Thank you, Dr. Vishal, for chairing the session with me. Thank you. Thank the organizers for asking us to chair the session. Thank you.